4. At 2 a.m., my son screamed, "Mom, Grandma's talking in my room." When I walked in, the phone in her hands was still ringing. 2 to 2 a.m., he screamed, "Grandma's talking in my room." I opened the door. The phone in her hands was still. It was 2 in the morning when my son's scream cut through the house. "Mom, Grandma's talking in my room." I jumped out of bed and ran toward him, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. When I burst into his room, I saw him standing there in his pajamas, frozen in fear. Beside his bed, on the floor, was an old black rotary phone, the one that used to belong to his grandmother. Its receiver was in his small hands, and the phone was still ringing. But my mother-in-law has been dead for 2 years. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe for more true and mysterious stories like this, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let me tell you what really happened that night. My name is Emily Carter, and I live with my 8-year-old son, Noah, in a small house that once belonged to my late mother-in-law, Eleanor. When my husband, Mark, passed away in an accident 3 years ago, Eleanor opened her doors to us. She was kind, loving, and treated Noah like her own shadow. Wherever she went, he followed. After she passed away from a heart attack, this house became ours. I thought living here would help Noah feel closer to her, but sometimes I think it's made it harder to let go. Eleanor's things are still everywhere. Her perfume bottle on the dresser, her floral teacup by the sink, and that old rotary phone sitting quietly in the corner of the living room. I kept it because Noah begged me not to throw it away. He said it reminded him of her voice. Most nights are quiet here. I work long shifts as a nurse, so when I'm home, I just want peace. Noah usually does his homework while I prepare dinner, and before bed, he likes to talk about his day. He's a sweet, curious boy, sometimes too curious. A few months after Eleanor died, Noah began saying things that made me uneasy. He'd come to me and say, "Mom, Grandma says she misses us." At first, I smiled and told him, "That's nice, honey. Maybe she's watching from heaven." But he shook his head and said, "No, she told me from the phone." That made me laugh nervously. "The phone doesn't work anymore, sweetheart. It's just for decoration." But Noah's face stayed serious. "It rang last night." I answered. "She said she wanted to talk to you too." I brushed it off as his imagination. Kids dream, kids make things up. I didn't want to feed into his grief. Still, every time I passed that phone, I could swear it looked cleaner than before, like someone had been wiping off the dust. One evening after work, I found Noah sitting by it with the receiver in his hand. He was quiet, listening. When I asked who he was talking to, he said, "Grandma says not to be scared." My body went cold. The phone wasn't plugged in. The cord just hung loose against the wall. I tried to stay calm and said, "Sweetheart, Grandma's in heaven now. Phones don't work that way." He looked confused and whispered, "But she said she misses her garden and your cooking." I froze, because those were the exact words Eleanor said the day before she passed away. After that, strange little things began to happen. Sometimes I'd wake up at night and hear faint clicking sounds, like a dial turning. Other times, I'd pass the living room and swear I heard a low hum, the kind old phones make when you pick up the receiver. I convinced myself it was the pipes, or the wind, or my tired mind playing tricks. But deep down, something felt wrong. One night, around midnight, I dreamed that Eleanor was standing at the foot of my bed, holding the phone. She looked calm, but serious. She said, "Emily, answer when it rings. You'll understand soon." I woke up shaking, my chest tight. The house was quiet, and I told myself it was just grief talking through my dreams. But that calm didn't last long, because a few nights later, on that cold October night, I heard Noah scream. It wasn't the sound of a nightmare. It was the kind of scream that comes from pure fear. I ran down the hallway as fast as I could, calling his name. His door was half open, and the dim blue nightlight made everything look strange. He was standing by his bed, shaking, pointing toward the corner of the room. "Mom," he cried, "Grandma's talking to me again." And then I saw it, the old rotary phone sitting on the floor beside his toys, its receiver hanging loose, the dial glowing faintly in the dark, ringing over and over again. When I reached for it, Noah whispered, "She said you have to answer this time." I picked it up with trembling hands. The line was filled with soft static, and then, clear as day, I heard a familiar voice whisper, "Emily, it's me." It was her. It was Eleanor. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The voice on the phone was calm and gentle, exactly the way I remembered Eleanor's voice when she used to call me on slow afternoons, just to ask what we were cooking for dinner. It was her tone, her warmth, even the soft hum she made before speaking, but that was impossible. My hands were shaking as I whispered, "Who is this?" The voice on the line only said, "Emily, it's me. Please listen." The way she said my name made my stomach twist. My heart wanted to believe it was her, but my mind screamed that it couldn't be. I felt Noah's hand clutch my arm. His little fingers were trembling. and his eyes were wide with confusion and fear. Before I could say anything else, the line went dead. The soft hum vanished, leaving nothing but a faint buzz in the silence of the room. I put the receiver down, trying to calm my breathing, and looked at my son. "It's okay," I told him, though I didn't believe it myself. "It's over now." But he only shook his head and said quietly, "She's still here." I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the phone like it might come alive again. Every small sound in the house, the creak of the floor, the tick of the clock, made me jump. By the time the sun came up, I had convinced myself that I must have been dreaming, that maybe the grief of losing her was playing tricks on both of us. The next morning, I unplugged the phone from the wall and took it outside to the trash bin. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at it, the sunlight hitting the cracked surface of the dial. It looked harmless, old, even fragile. But the longer I held it, the heavier it seemed, like it didn't want to be thrown away. I took a deep breath and dropped it into the bin. "It's just a phone," I whispered to myself. "That's all it ever was." When Noah woke up, I tried to make things feel normal. Pancakes, cartoons, soft music. But he was quiet. He barely ate. At one point he asked, "Mom, did you hear what Grandma said?" I froze and pretended not to understand. "She said we're not alone in the house anymore." I forced a smile and told him not to say things like that it would scare both of us. He didn't argue. He just nodded, and I saw tears fill his eyes before he turned away. That evening, I came home from work and walked into the living room. The first thing I saw made my knees go weak. The rotary phone was sitting right back where it had always been, on the small table near the couch. Clean, shiny, perfectly placed. I ran to the trash bin outside, but it was empty. I stood there for a long time, staring at that phone. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't even find my voice. I called my sister Rachel and told her everything. She listened quietly before saying, "Emily, you've been under a lot of stress. You're working too hard, and Noah is grieving. You both need rest." I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew what I had heard. I had spoken to that voice. I wasn't losing my mind. That night, I locked Noah's door and slept with him in my bed. Around 2 a.m, I woke to a faint sound from the hallway, the click of a phone dial turning. My chest tightened. I slowly got up, opened the door, and looked toward the living room. The phone was off the hook, lying on the carpet, the cord stretched tight like someone had been holding it. I crept closer and whispered, "Who's there?" The air felt cold, heavy. I picked up the receiver with a shaking hand. At first there was only static. Then I heard a voice that made my heart race. It wasn't Eleanor this time. It was a man's voice. Low, broken, distant. "She told me you'd answer," he said. I dropped the phone instantly and stumbled backward. My mind spun. Eleanor never mentioned anyone. Who was he talking about? The next morning, Noah wouldn't leave his room. He sat on his bed, clutching his stuffed bear, his face pale. "Grandma's mad," he said quietly. "She said you shouldn't have thrown her phone away." I tried to calm him, but every time I said we were safe, he shook his head harder. "She said she's not talking through the phone anymore. She's in the walls now." By that point, I didn't know what to believe. The phone kept moving back to the same table no matter where I put it. Sometimes it rang once in the middle of the night, just one sharp tone that echoed through the house like a warning. Other nights, I'd hear faint whispers behind the walls, words I couldn't make out, followed by the smell of lavender, Eleanor's perfume. I started keeping the lights on at night. I slept beside Noah every evening, my heart never truly resting. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like someone, or something, was watching, waiting for me to pick up that phone again. One night, while I was tucking Noah into bed, he looked up at me with wide eyes and said, "Mom, Grandma says she's coming to visit you tonight. She wants to talk to you herself." I tried to laugh, but my voice cracked. "Sweetheart, Grandma's gone. She can't come back." He looked at me, his voice barely a whisper. "She already did." That was the moment I knew I couldn't keep pretending it was just my imagination. Something was happening inside that house, and whether it was Eleanor or something pretending to be her, I had to face it. I reached my breaking point the night Noah whispered, "She already did." Those 3 words shattered any last bit of doubt I had been clinging to. My heart pounded as I tucked him in, forcing a smile I didn't feel. Inside, I was unraveling. For weeks, I had been telling myself that the phone's ringing was just a glitch, the voice on the line just my mind echoing grief. But Noah's fear wasn't imagined. He was only 8. He couldn't fake the trembling in his hands, the sleepless circles under his eyes, the way he clutched his stuffed bear like it was a lifeline. Whatever was happening in our house, it was reaching for him, and I wasn't going to let it take him from me. After putting Noah to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and pen, trying to think through my options like a nurse triaging an emergency. My first instinct was to leave the house, but I had nowhere to go at 2 a.m. My sister Rachel lived 3 hours away, and I couldn't exactly call her in the middle of the night to say my dead mother-in-law was calling from a phone that didn't work. The idea of staying there another night made my stomach churn, but I couldn't risk dragging Noah out into the cold without a plan. I needed to know what we were dealing with. I remembered the box of Eleanor's things I had stored in the attic after the funeral. Things I had been too heartbroken to sort through. Maybe, just maybe, there would be something there to explain this. I grabbed a flashlight and crept upstairs to the attic. The wooden steps groaned under my weight, the sound loud in the still house. The attic smelled like dust and cedar. Boxes were stacked haphazardly against the walls, labeled with fading marker. Eleanor's kitchen, Mark's toys, photos. I dug until I found one that said simply, Eleanor, keep. Inside were odds and ends. An old scarf, a jewelry box, faded recipes. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was a small cassette recorder and a bundle of tapes labeled with dates spanning decades. A yellow sticky note clung to the top of the recorder. In Eleanor's neat handwriting it read, For Emily. My hands shook as I unfolded it. There was a message scribbled beneath. If you're hearing my voice after I'm gone, it means it's found you too. Protect Noah. I sat back on my heels, my heart thudding. The attic felt colder now, like the air itself had gone thin. I pressed play on the recorder. The tape hissed. Then a voice emerged. Eleanor's voice, but younger, softer. She was humming a lullaby. Then her tone shifted. She sounded afraid. Emily, she said, if you're listening to this, don't answer the phone. It's not me. It uses my voice. It tried with me first. I thought I could stop it, but I was wrong. I turned off the recorder, my pulse racing. Everything inside me wanted to run downstairs, scoop up Noah, and leave the house right then. But a new thought cut through the fear. If I didn't confront this thing now, it would follow us. It had attached itself to Eleanor before she died. Now it was trying to reach Noah. If I ran, it might win. I carried the recorder back to the kitchen and sat staring at it for a long time. Eleanor had tried to warn me. She'd known this would happen. I realized now that every time the phone rang, I had been feeding it by picking up. If it wanted me so badly, maybe I could turn that against it. When the clock crept past 1 a.m, I put on my thick sweater and poured myself a cup of coffee. I needed to stay sharp. I placed the rotary phone in the center of the kitchen table, its cord coiled like a waiting snake. Noah was asleep upstairs. I had checked on him twice already. I took Eleanor's cross necklace from my jewelry box, the one she gave me before she died, and looped it around my wrist like a charm. I whispered to myself, this is my house. This is my son. You don't get to take him. At exactly 2 a.m., the phone rang. The sound was softer this time, almost polite, like it knew I was expecting it. My stomach knotted. I picked up the receiver and pressed it to my ear, my voice steady, even though my hands were shaking. If you're really Eleanor, I said, tell me something only she would know. For a moment, there was only static. Then a voice, my voice, came through. He's not safe with you. I gripped the receiver tighter. You're not her, I said. The voice laughed, low and hollow. She let me in first. She called for me every night, and I came. Now you're calling me too. A cold draft swept through the kitchen, making the curtains sway. The smell of lavender, Eleanor's perfume, filled the room, but it was sharp now, cloying, like spoiled flowers. My hand trembled as I said, leave my son alone. Take me instead. The voice went quiet for a heartbeat, then whispered, we'll see. I slammed the receiver down and backed away from the table, breathing hard. The phone stayed silent, but for the first time, I felt like I had drawn a line in the sand. Whatever this thing was, it knew I was no longer going to ignore it. I ran upstairs to check on Noah. He was asleep, his little chest rising and falling in the glow of the nightlight. I sat on the edge of his bed and brushed his hair back. I'm here, baby, I whispered. I'm not letting anything happen to you. That night, I didn't leave his room. I sat in the chair by his bed, watching the shadows crawl across the walls. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew the time for pretending was over. It wanted me to answer. Next time, I'd be ready to answer on my terms. This was no longer about fear. It was about protecting my son, whatever it took. The next night came faster than I wanted it to. Every tick of the clock felt heavier than the one before. I barely slept the previous night, and even though my eyes stung from exhaustion, I couldn't rest. I had a feeling deep in my chest that something was going to happen, something final. All day, I moved through the house like a shadow, keeping Noah close, pretending everything was normal while fighting the dread that clung to me like static. He seemed quieter than usual too, distant, like he was listening for something I couldn't hear. After dinner, he asked me a question that froze me. Mom, he said softly, what happens if you don't answer when Grandma calls? I set my fork down slowly. Why do you ask that, sweetheart? He looked down at his plate. Because she said she's getting tired of waiting. My heart started to pound. When did she tell you that? I asked. He shrugged, his voice trembling. When I was brushing my teeth, she said she needs to talk to you herself. I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor. Every instinct screamed that we had to leave, but I also knew running wasn't the answer. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't bound to the house anymore. It had found a way to use Eleanor's voice, to reach us wherever it wanted. I couldn't keep letting it control my son with fear. If it wanted to talk, I was going to let it. But this time, I'd make sure it faced me, not him. I tucked Noah into my bed that night and left the lamp on. If you wake up and don't see me, stay here, okay? He nodded sleepily, gripping his stuffed bear. Don't answer any phone, I added firmly, no matter what you hear. By the time the clock struck 2, the house felt like it was holding its breath. The air was still, thick, almost too quiet. I sat at the kitchen table again, with the old rotary phone in front of me. I had plugged it back into the wall earlier that evening, even though it hadn't been connected to any real line in years. A faint humming sound came from it, like it was alive. My hands rested on the table, one clutching Eleanor's cross, the other hovering near the receiver. Then it rang. It wasn't the sharp, shrill ring of a normal phone. It was lower, slower, like the sound came from far away, somewhere deep beneath the house. I took a deep breath and answered. Eleanor, I said firmly, if this is really you, talk to me. Static hissed for a moment. Then her voice came through, soft and trembling. Emily, I tried to warn you. I couldn't stop it. I felt my throat tighten. Stop what? It came through the line, she said, her tone cracking. It pretends to be me, but it's not. You have to protect him. A chill crawled up my arms. Protect Noah from what? Her voice broke into sobs. I thought I could handle it when it started calling me after your father died. I was wrong. I kept answering, and every time I did, it grew stronger. Now it wants him. Before I could respond, her voice suddenly changed. It deepened, twisted, becoming something unnatural. You shouldn't have ignored me, Emily. I dropped the phone onto the table. The sound of laughter, low and cruel, filled the air around me, even though the receiver lay flat. The lights flickered, and I heard something moving down the hallway. Slow, dragging steps that stopped just outside the kitchen. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I forced myself to stand, my knees shaking. You're not real, I said, though I barely believed the words. A shadow stretched across the doorway, tall and thin, reaching toward the light. I grabbed the cross from my wrist and held it up. You're not taking my son. The shadow hesitated. Then, from the floor where the phone sat, I heard Noah's voice echoing faintly. Mom, help me. I froze. The sound came from the phone itself, not upstairs. Noah, I whispered. Mom, please. The voice cried again, desperate. She's hurting me. Without thinking, I ran toward the stairs. But as soon as I reached the first step, I saw Noah standing at the top, clutching his bear. He was awake, terrified. I'm right here, Mom, he said. The voice on the phone screamed, furious. It wasn't Noah anymore. It was something else, mimicking him. You can't keep him, it hissed. He belongs to me now. The lights exploded in a burst of sparks, plunging the house into darkness. I turned back toward the kitchen just in time to see the rotary phone spinning wildly, the dial clicking faster and faster on its own. The smell of burnt plastic filled the air. I ran back, grabbed the phone, and yelled, If you want someone, take me instead. For a moment, everything stopped. Then the static roared so loudly, it rattled the windows. The voice on the line whispered, As you wish. Pain shot through my hand, like fire crawling up my arm. I screamed, throwing the phone against the wall. It shattered into pieces, the sound echoing like thunder. The smell of smoke filled the air, and the humming stopped. The house fell completely silent. When I turned, the shadow in the doorway was gone. The cold air lifted, replaced by the faint scent of lavender, this time soft, peaceful, not heavy and wrong. I ran upstairs and scooped Noah into my arms. He was crying, but unhurt. I held him tight, whispering, It's over, baby. It's over. He looked up at me with tears in his eye. Grandma says thank you. I froze, searching his face. What did you say? She says thank you for helping her go, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Then he yawned and rested his head against my shoulder, falling asleep almost instantly. I stood there in the quiet, holding him as the first light of dawn began to slip through the windows. The house felt lighter, the air easier to breathe. I didn't know what exactly had happened, but for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. When I walked back downstairs later that morning, the pieces of the phone were gone. In their place, lying on the kitchen table, was Eleanor's cross necklace, untangled and gleaming in the sunlight. The morning after felt different, the kind of different that sinks into your bones before you even open your eyes. The air was still, quiet, not heavy or cold anymore, just still. Sunlight poured through the curtains, stretching across the floor like it hadn't in months. For a few seconds, I let myself believe it was over. I stayed still, holding my breath, afraid that if I moved, I might wake something up again. Then I heard the soft breathing beside me. Noah, still asleep, curled against me, clutching his stuffed bear. For the first time in what felt like forever, he was sleeping peacefully. His face wasn't tense or pale. He looked calm, safe. I slipped out of bed quietly and went downstairs. Every creak of the steps felt louder than usual, but nothing answered back this time. No static, no whispers, no cold spots that made my skin prickle. The air was warm. The kitchen was filled with the soft glow of morning light, but something made me stop halfway across the room. The kitchen table was empty. The shattered pieces of the old rotary phone that I'd seen last night were gone. In their place, lying right in the center of the table, was Eleanor's gold cross necklace. Perfectly clean, perfectly still. I picked it up carefully. It felt warm in my hand, like it had been sitting in sunlight for hours. For a long moment, I just stood there holding it, staring at the spot where the phone used to be. There were no signs of damage, no scorch marks, no trace of what had happened. It was as if the night before had been erased, except for the faint echo of what I'd felt. The cold, the voice, the terror, and now, this calm. I slipped the necklace around my neck. It settled against my skin lightly, like it belonged there. A part of me felt peace for the first time in months, maybe years. But another part of me, deep down, couldn't shake the unease. It was quiet, yes, but quiet can be deceptive. I'd learned that the hard way. When Noah woke up later, he ran into the kitchen and hugged me tight, his small arms wrapping around my waist. "You were right, Mom," he said softly. "Grandma's not sad anymore." I looked down at him, trying to steady my voice. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He smiled faintly. "She came to say goodbye. She was standing by the window. She said she's going where Grandpa is." My hands trembled as I brushed his hair away from his face. "Did she say anything else?" He thought for a second, then nodded. "She said to tell you thank you for helping her, and that she loves us." That was all I needed to hear. Tears filled my eyes, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from release. I had spent so long running from grief, trying to bury everything Eleanor left behind, pretending that her death was something we could move past. Maybe she had just needed us to let her go. We spent the rest of the day cleaning the house together. I opened the windows, let the sunlight in, and for the first time in a long time, the house felt alive again. We played music, made pancakes, laughed when Noah spilled syrup all over the counter. The sound of his laughter echoed off the walls, and it felt like the house was laughing with him. I knew the haunting had ended, but it didn't feel like something evil had been defeated. It felt like something lost had finally found its way home. That night, when Noah fell asleep, I sat in the living room by the fireplace, holding the necklace again. I whispered quietly, "Thank you, Eleanor, for watching over us, for warning us, for not giving up." The room stayed quiet, but the warmth from the fire seemed to deepen, spreading through the air like an unseen embrace. I didn't need words to know she had heard me. A few days later, I took the phone cords and the old broken dial, what little was left of it after that night, and buried them behind the garden near the oak tree. It felt symbolic, like closing a chapter. I placed a small stone over the spot and whispered one last goodbye. That night, I dreamed of Eleanor for the final time. She was standing in her garden, wearing her favorite blue sweater, smiling the way she always did when she saw Noah playing. She didn't say anything. She just nodded once, turned, and walked toward a bright field of light. I woke up with tears in my eyes, but also a deep calm I hadn't felt in years. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly returned to normal. Noah started sleeping through the night again. He stopped talking to Grandma and started drawing superheroes instead. I went back to work, and even though the long nights at the hospital still tired me out, I no longer dreaded coming home. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt protected. Still, sometimes, when I walk through the hallway late at night, I catch the faintest smell of lavender, the same scent that once terrified me. But now, it doesn't make my heart race. It makes me smile. Maybe it's just memory lingering in the air, or maybe it's her way of saying she's still watching, quietly, peacefully, from wherever she is. One evening, as I was tucking Noah into bed, he looked up at me sleepily and said, "Mom, Grandma's happy now, right?" I nodded and kissed his forehead. "She is, honey, and she's watching over us." He smiled and murmured, "Then we don't have to be scared anymore." I turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him drift off to sleep. The soft glow of the nightlight reflected off the cross around my neck. I took a deep breath, whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, and finally closed the door with a steady heart. The phone hasn't rung again since that night, but I know if it ever did, I wouldn't be afraid to answer. Not because I expect to hear a ghost, but because I finally understand what she was trying to tell me. Some calls aren't meant to haunt us. They're meant to help us find closure. If you felt connected to this story, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your thoughts and hearing your stories too.